Hi everybody. A quick trip to the library today. I have 3 books that I'm really excited to talk to you about that I've finished. And I'm finally here to talk to you about them. I was a little delayed. I was finishing up the last book and I really wanted to get all of them back to the library. I took it with me to visit my mom in Florida with my daughter. We were able to go down for a long weekend, and it was the perfect book to have to read a couple pages in the evening. It was Michelle de Kretzer's Theory and Practice. Yesterday, I was at the thrift store, not the library, and I recorded some thoughts about Theory and Practice and 2 other books that I had recently finished that I absolutely loved. So I'm going to drop you into that segment if it's coherent, and you'll understand the reasons why when you get there. If it's not coherent, I'll just record another thing talking about those books, but here you go. Hi there. The clip that I recorded yesterday about the 3 books I want to talk about, it doesn't have any sound. I don't know. Suki is with us. She is settling in for a nap. And she has had a bit of a rough couple of days. She had a bit of a scare, and we had a bit of a scare. A couple days ago, I was out in the yard with her. For all of you that don't know, she is an outdoor cat of sorts. She loves to be outdoors. She is a rescue. She lived the first half of her 3 years out in the wild with other cats as a feral cat in West Virginia. She was captured, brought to a cat rescue here in the Pittsburgh area, and she adopted us at that point. And I take her outside with a harness and a leash so that she doesn't just go wandering off great distances. She loves the adventure of it in our yard. Long story short, a visiting dog of our neighbors who have an invisible fence walked out the door with our neighbor, and as I was at the tree line with Suki chatting with one of the other neighbors, and this dog doesn't have an invisible fence collar. She's very boisterous and curious and ran after Suki. Suki ran up a tree, but she ran up to the very top, which was very high. She's a tree climber. She climbs up and down climbs maybe to my head height, but this was much higher than that. The fire department, someone from the fire department came. We eventually got a friend who is a tree climber who rescued her out of the tree. But as he was descending with his equipment, which happens really fast, thankfully, she jumped out of his arms and landed pretty hard. I mean, not harder than normal from a jump, but it was a higher distance. So she's, I'm sure, very sore here, and we're giving her some pain medications. Anyway, okay, I'll have that bookmarked so you can just skip it if you want. All right, one of the books that I had was Alba de Cespedes, a book from Alba de Cespedes, whose book from the 1940s, I think, called The Forbidden Notebook, I read maybe a year and a half ago. She's like, I think she's oh my goodness, am I getting this wrong? Like a Cuban Italian? Yeah, she's a Cuban Italian writer who wrote during like the 30s and 40s. And I don't have the book anymore, but this book called There's No Turning Back, which I'll show you, was first published in 1938. This was before the Forbidden Notebook, but it's just been published or translated into English by Anne Goldstein. This is a book about 4 women in a convent, and they're young women, so they're in this convent because they're not at home, and they are all very different from each other. She's known as a feminist author. So this book was published, but then was not, but then was banned by Mussolini's regime because of its daringness, non-conventional nature. Oh, yeah, it says they all come from radically different backgrounds who attend the same college in Rome. So I guess this, what I'm calling a convent, is actually a college, but it's like a Catholic college with nuns. I thought this book was such a lovely counterpoint to that third book I was reading, which is On the Calculation of Volume 1. I was reading that one in the morning and I was reading this one at night. And I would sometimes get some of the women mixed up. I didn't care. I just loved the tone and the beautiful writing of this book. I loved The Forbidden Notebook. It has more of a plot and drama. It's about a woman whose children are grown and growing up, and she wants to have some independence and a little piece of something of her own, hence The Forbidden Notebook. But so I loved the message in that book, and I was rooting for her, and I was rooting for these women too, but because there's 8 of them, I sometimes get some of them but I recommend this book with a gentle tone but a strong message if you think about put this book in the time that it was written. Pretty cool. The other one is, as I had mentioned, On the Calculation of Volume. Tara Selter, the heroine, has involuntarily stepped off the train of time in her world. November 18th repeats itself endlessly. She's married to Thomas. She'd taken a train ride. Oh, by the way, this is done by the writer Solveig Bali and translated by Barbara Haviland. I think Solveig Bali, and I'm sorry I'm saying that wrong, is a Danish author. And I was skeptical because I thought, oh, is this going to be like the movie Groundhog Day? Am I going to have to totally suspend my disbelief? I didn't know how it was going to play out, but it's so much more nuanced than that, because she's able to clue her husband in on the fact that she's experiencing November 18th over again, but I don't think he is. And does time really move on for him? I didn't really understand everything, but I didn't care. I was in it. I had some anxiety reading this book. I didn't understand how she was going to get out of her entrapment in the day. She comes up with a plan, and that's where volume 2 will kick in. That's why I'm so eager to read it. This is just done so well. There were times when I stepped out of it and said, I started thinking logically about everything, but what I loved about and I really appreciated about this book was its matter-of-fact tone. I would compare it to the tone of We Who Have Never Known Men, where it's just facts and, certainly we hear about Tara's emotional journey in all of this too, but it's done in such a crisp and clear way that you can journey along, and you're also just so curious about okay, she's come up with a plan how she might try to end this thing that she's in. I hope it works, and that's really where I'm at. So I was very delighted that I was able to be under the spell of this book when I was reading it. And then I started to read Theory and Practice by Michelle de Kretser. So it says, with the echoes of Shirley Hazard and Virginia Woolf, a new novel of startling intelligence from prize-winning author Michelle de Kretser, following a woman looking back on her young adulthood. In the late 80s, the narrator of Theory and Practice, a first-generation immigrant from Sri Lanka who moved to Sydney in her childhood, sets up a life in Melbourne for grad school. Jilted by a lover who cheats on her with another self-described feminist, she's thrown into a deeper confusion about her identity and the people around her. So she meets a guy named Kit. She might start kind of a relationship with Kit, but it's complicated because there's someone else involved. I really enjoyed, so she is pursuing, I think, a grad degree, and she's doing her thesis on Virginia Woolf and Virginia Woolf's feminist ideals. But she's reading Woolf. She's reading 3 books of Woolf, and she's reading Woolf's diaries. And she's finding out a whole bunch of things about Woolf through her diaries that seemingly don't line up with feminist, broader views. And there's some racist language in the diary, and it's almost like you're getting some real gritty and maybe an ugly side of Virginia Woolf, really of her time, unfortunately, it seems, from what we've seen of other writers in the turn of the century and beyond, but really in that in the way that they're talking about in the way she's talking about her husband being Jewish, and the help at a certain house, or maybe her house, when she was growing up. I really liked the character who was her thesis advisor, her academic advisor. Her name's Paula, and Paula is an older woman and is a feminist, and how the author, who is Sri Lankan and Australian, draws this character Paula, who is a feminist in the 80s, and how that looked in Australia specifically, but just in the 80s broadly, and how that even between the 2 generations, what kind of feminist you had to be at that college, that sort of thing. So I really like that. I didn't go too deep into the Woolf part of the book in terms of appreciating that as much, because I was reading it as something at nighttime. I took it on a trip. We took a really quick trip to visit my mom, as I said, and I loved the writing. I listened to a little bit of an interview of Michelle de Kretser on a podcast, and so you'll see in the next part of the library clip that I am interested in reading some more of her books. So these 3 books, I could not recommend them more, and I'll put you back into the end of the clip. Okay, so at the library, I was really here just to return books because I'd had them for so long. I have no holds that have come in. I'm really hoping to get on the calculation of volume 2 from the library, but if I don't, I might just have to pick it up somewhere, because I'm really eager to read volume 2, as I had said. But speaking of Michelle de Kretser and Theory and Practice, I then searched for 2 other books. Somebody's coming my way. 2 other books by Michelle de Kretser. One of them is called The Life to Come. This came out in 2018, it looks like. And this one's called Scary Monsters. This is 2022, and it says a novel in 2 parts. I listened to a bit of a interview with her, and yeah, it's like the back of the book is flipped. Interesting. Scary Monsters is a radically brilliant diptych novel in complex conversation with itself. When my family emigrated, it felt as if we'd been stood on our heads. Michelle de Kretzer's electrifying book turns the novel upside down, literally, just as migration has upended her characters' lives. Lily's family migrated to Australia from Asia when she was a teenager. Now in the 80s, she's teaching in the south of France. I'm not going to read any more of the blurb because I don't need to know anymore. I just want to try this. And then The Life to Come, set in Australia, France, and Sri Lanka. So there's a bit of a theme from this author, as she is Sri Lankan and is a Melbourne author at this point. The Life to Come is about the stories we tell and don't tell ourselves as individuals, as societies, and as nations, driven by a vivid cast of characters. Pippa is an Australian writer who longs for the success of her novelist teacher and eventually comes to fear that she missed everything important, so on, so on. I don't need to read any more of this. I did hear Michelle de Kretzer talk about it, and we'll see which one I get into. And so more on that, I'll keep you posted. And then the other thing I got into was I picked up, like I think in my last video, I mentioned that whatever book I had read, and I'll put that book here because it's completely escaping me right now. I recently read a book where the author, maybe it was a memoir, was talking about A.S. Byatt's Possession, a book I had tried to read a couple times and just got bogged down in the small text of the book itself, but also it's very dense writing, and it's epistolary. Some of it's epistolary, which I love. So I don't know. I just picked up where my bookmark was, and I actually went back a few pages. This is a book about two people doing research on two Victorian poets. Now, I'm starting on page 153. I backed up maybe page 150. So I can't tell you much about the two people. One is a young woman, the other is a guy. I'm just going to keep reading forward, but then I am going to read the beginning at some point, or maybe I'll just decide to read from the beginning. I'm giving that some thought. But anyway, I'm actually liking it so far. Like, it's only been a couple pages. It was only last night that I started reading it. So, but I'm glad that that other book, maybe it was a memoir, again, I don't remember, started to get me interested in possession again. Don't you love that? I love that. I think that's so cool about books. Short and sweet. I really wanted to share those 3 books with all of you as recommendations and just good reads, like spring, freshness, brightness, new books, like all 3 new books. Well, De Cespedes is not new, but newly translated. Like, I just feel like, wow, you know, just to read 3 books that have been published here in the US recently is and really enjoy all of them and recommend them is really pretty rare for me. I hope you're enjoying what will be tomorrow, April 1st. I hope we can all enjoy some spring weather if you live in the type of area that I do in Pennsylvania. Oh, here comes someone. It's still always uncomfortable when they make eye contact with you in the rear view, in the side view mirror, and you're talking to a phone. I don't know why that's so unusual, because isn't everybody talking to a phone while walking or whatever? I don't know. Anyway, thank you for joining me again, and join in the conversation below. Let me know what you're reading, and I'll see you on the next